This is the podcast for Narrate Church. Narrate Church meets every Sunday at 9 and 11 a.m. at the Grand Street Theater in Helena, Montana. For more information, visit www.narratechurch.org.
We're a church, which you were going, I'm going to get, like, what else would it be? Where would I show up at? We are a church, so that should be a relief to you, or maybe not. I guess that cuts both ways. But the way we think about things and the way we really think about life is gathering and scattering, and what we mean by that is we value this, we value Sunday morning, we think that this still plays an integral role in helping us wrestle with who Jesus really is and what his dreams for the world really are, no matter where we're at on our spiritual journey. And yet we're also constantly trying to remind ourselves that the other 6 days, they are also very, very important. We think around here that that's really where the opportunity lies for us to tell our community who Jesus is by the way we serve. I guess you could say that around here we're not convinced that anyone needs more information so much as what they need is someone to, as the rabbi said, put the divine on display, to put a towel over our arm and just serve people in Jesus' name. And so that's where the dodgeball thing comes from. That came from year one, where we went, hey, let's gather people right around cabin fever time, and let's just gather a bunch of adults and let them play dodgeball together. It started as this silly idea that we didn't think would go anywhere. Every year I'm waiting for the idea to just bomb, and then we'll find something else to do in March, and every year it just gets bigger, to the point where last year we had 44 teams, close to 500 people in the Capitol High gym, a bunch of dignified adults throwing dodgeballs at each other. And what's really fun is if you don't want to play, maybe because you tore your rotator cuff in high school, it's just as much fun to watch. Right, John? It's just as much fun to sit in the stands and watch the whole thing unfold, and there's lots of serving, scattering opportunities there. We'll talk more about that as things unfold. There's posters out there on Guest Central if you'd like to grab one of those and take it to work. And then the ski retreat, that, I know I'm old, and Caleb tells me when you call it a retreat, you sound old. Were they retreats, Rob, when you were a high school pastor? Yeah, see, they're not retreats anymore. They're weekends. Who knows? Anyway, our heart there is really to make this a scattering event, that it's not just a student thing, but that it's all of us rallying around the student realm, whether you have students or not. And so there's lots of ways to be involved, whether that's helping them transport kids or loaning them a vehicle or taking a trip on Saturday with a load of skis so that those kids can ski with their stuff on Discovery on Saturday. See, that's the other thing, though. When I was there, you didn't dare call you kids. It was students. I mean, if you called them kids, that meant you hadn't been to the latest youth worker conference. And so we got to one up on them there. Right? Anyway, let us know if you'd like to be involved in that. This morning is, and I mean this in the most sincere of ways, is an incredible privilege of ours, of mine. Those of you that have been around Narrate for a while, you know that one of the real forming things, one of the real shaping environments for me was this great church that I sat in the back row of, smelling like cigarettes and sitting with my girlfriend from 17 to 19 years old. And it was this great church that just allowed me to hide, is the way that I say it. In fact, if you're familiar with Narrate culture, you know that part of what we do around here is we try to create an atmosphere where you can hide. And in all honesty, like that's both a good thing and a bad thing, because some of you want to be greeted and you want people to say hi to you and you don't want them to stare at your feet. That's why we put Guest Central there, because the rest of us, we just like to stare at our feet and stay introverted. Because what we think is valuable is also creating a space where people, they just want to sneak in and sneak out. You could sit even up in the balcony, and that makes it even easier, right? Even quicker exit. So this guy named Rob Driggs led at that church. Years later, I met a gal who would become my wife, and he was her youth pastor. He actually performed our wedding ceremony. I think when we asked him, I said, will you marry us? Or will you marry me? And he said, no, you're marrying Teresa. But he did, in fact, perform. And I still use that joke at wedding ceremonies, by the way, because I don't have very many, so I just steal and pillage. So my friend Rob is going to come unpack the word for us this morning. Would you help me welcome him?
Thanks, Adam. Oh, gosh, I love coming up here. I really do. I didn't get a chance to last year because I was in the middle of a job change and career change. Now I'm working with Word of Life in Billings, and so I'm doing full-time vocational ministry again with a partner who's leading the church. And so I was really glad you didn't give up on me. I was kind of afraid I'd sort of blown that opportunity. I also got to mention the worship team this morning. That was so much fun. And when I walked in this morning, they were practicing that song that was just before the offering. If that was not enough, sounded like the Missing Beatles song from Abbey Road, didn't it? Kind of sort of had a little Ringo. You know, I kind of waiting for John Lennon's Nobody Told Me There'd Be Days Like These. They go right into that from that song, and it would be perfect for this message. But they didn't, so, and there are probably a lot of reasons why they didn't, so that's enough. Well, anyway, thanks for having me today. Genesis 22 is where we're going to be sort of looking at it, and if you don't want to turn to it, you don't have an outline, we'll show you. But let me start by saying this. Back in 2005, my brother Jim and I, we were watching the Super Bowl together when we saw this advertisement. Take a look. If you look, he will come.
2005 Ford Mustang. The legend lives. Ford, built for the road ahead.
I looked at Jim and I said, I can't afford one of those now, but when those become used cars, I'm going to have one of those cars. You know, I mean, they even hired a dead actor, you know, and when you can get a contract with a dead actor, you've got a product on your hands there. Wow. So several years later, fast forwarding to about 3 years ago, March 2010, my wife Tammy and I, we were talking, and she says, okay, I'm going to give you a budget to go find this Mustang, because literally I've been pestering her about this car since that ad. I had to have one of those. That was the first year of the retro design, and ooh, wow, I really loved it. So here's the amount she gave me, and it wasn't a lot, but I knew if I looked around long enough, I'd probably find something that would be okay. And I'm really, really picky. So I went online to Auto Trader, and I was literally looking nationwide for my car, because I had key in very specific things. Basically, the car that I was going to buy was going to be the one I would have ordered from the factory, if it existed. One car made the return on the national website. One car in Bellingham, Washington. Okay, first red flag, it had been advertised for a long time and had not sold. First red flag. Dun, dun, dun. Second red flag, those of you that are not with me know you've done some online shopping before. You got to kind of watch the flags. The second red flag was they were asking below book value for the car. That's another little possible red flag. And so I ended up calling him, talking to him, and I just thought, you know, I'm going to just shoot him an offer and just see what happens. So I fired an offer well below what he was asking, and he accepted it immediately. Third red flag. You know, what's wrong with the car? But I got to talking to my brother Jim, and I said, well, you know, for the amount that we're going to get it, if it's close, if I get out there and it's a jalopy, or, you know, I can always, you know, figure out a way to get home again. But if it is what it is and it needs a little bit of repair, we can afford to do that now, and we can kind of fix it up. So he says, well, I'd go for it. So I fly out there, and I get to Bellingham, and the fourth red flag happened. He was late in picking me up at the airport, and now I'm really nervous because I'm thinking, what have I done? I'm kind of committed, you know, and am I thumbing a ride back to Billings, you know, from Bellingham because I don't have a car? And he comes to pick me up, and one flag turns green on me because he picks me up in the company truck. It's a brand new Ford F-150 with his logo all over it, and he's a really well-dressed businessman, and so I was feeling pretty good. We get in the truck, and we head out of town to his house, and it's a horse ranch, and if you've ever been to Bellingham, Washington, there are horse ranches out there, so we're driving up this winding little trail to his house, very well-manicured property, beautiful house, and I'm feeling really good about this, and we get to the garage. There's about 4 bays, and they're all closed, and he hits a button, and the one on the end, the garage door comes up, and there is the back end of this Mustang that I was buying, covered in lamb's skin, this nicely heated shop. It hasn't probably even ever had rain on it before, the poor thing. And he backs it out, and I'm telling you, this car is mint condition. It's mint condition. And I got into it and noticed that it even had more features in it than he had advertised. And I got out of there as fast as I could. I mean, I spat gravel all the way to the interstate because I didn't want him to change his mind. Called my brother from the phone. I said, "You'll never believe how nice this car is." Don't you like nice surprises? Have you ever bought a car before, or you bought a used vehicle and it's actually nicer than what you thought it was and you got a good deal? Yeah, that's kind of cool. You ever put on a jacket that you haven't worn for a while? There's a $50 bill in the pocket you forgot about? You're jacked because, it's yours. It's always been yours, but you didn't know it was yours, so it's new to you. It's kind of fun. All kinds of little things. You step on the bathroom scale and you weigh less than you thought you did. That's kind of cool. I haven't done that for a while, but when it happens, it's kind of cool. Some surprises aren't so fun. IRS contacts you something about an audit. That's not very much fun. You go to the dentist and they tell you that little problem really is a big problem and they're going to have to do something bad. That's not so much fun. Driving up from Townsend last night, a not so nice surprise. The highway between Townsend and Helena, about the time that storm hit, glare ice, wet glare ice. Watched a car behind me spin out, go into the field. That was not a very nice surprise. So other than that, my impression this trip to Helena was pretty good, but you need to work on that for me. The fact of the matter is life is full of surprises, and my point today is that if you're a Christ follower, if you've been following God, whatever that means, wherever you're at in your life, maybe you're just thinking about, becoming a person who's interested in the things of God, but if you've been involved in that for any amount of time, you know that God throws some surprises our way from time to time, doesn't he? And it's not that he engineers calamity. This is really important to understand. I don't believe God engineers the calamity and problems that we have. And I'll tell you why. He doesn't need to. We do that really well all by ourselves, don't we? We create plenty of problems. The world that we live in, other people, circumstances of the world, that creates all kinds of problems. So he doesn't have to stay up late at night trying to think of a new way to throw a difficulty our way. But what happens is that he meets us in the middle of those. And that's a critical thing to remember, that regardless of the scenario or situation, he's always interested in stepping into the middle of that and helping us to make some hay out of it. And so that's kind of where we're going a little bit today. An Old Testament character you'd be familiar with, his name is Abraham. We're not going to get into all the theology about Abraham. I just kind of want to tell a snapshot story of a particular place in his life. This is a guy that experienced a lot of surprises in his walk with God, and although many of the surprises were good, and they were good to him and good to people around him, there were oftentimes, with those surprises, a unique set of problems, a unique set of dilemmas, and a unique set of challenges that were his to overcome. So the title of today's message, deeply intuitive, Yahweh Will Provide, which is just profound in and of itself, because it comes from this passage, Genesis 22:14. The passage says, "So Abraham called the place, the Lord will provide." And I prayed for months. What would be a clever way of titling this message? Oh, yeah, the Lord will provide. I'll just use a different name for the Lord. So that's what I did. But you're thinking, so when's he done? Is that buffet still open? Is that open until noon? Can we get there? The Hebrew language, very important to understand that in the original language of that passage, the words Yahweh Yireh show up. Now, you don't have to remember anything about it other than it's a description of who God is in his nature and his character. And Abraham pronounced that out loud. And that still resonates with us today because the name Yahweh Yireh literally means Yahweh will provide. Or other scholars have translated it as saying the Lord will see or the Lord sees. So when you combine all that, the concept, the meaning from the original text is clear. Yahweh Yireh means that God will provide. God sees what is needed, and God will see it through. It's a package deal. And that's why Abraham was responding to God in this way. He was convinced that God would come through for him in the particular situation we'll look at, even if God went about it in peculiar ways. And so even in the midst of the test we're going to learn about a little bit here, Abraham learned that sometimes, and this is true for me, maybe it is for you, sometimes God packs his provision in a problem, and he does that for our own good, and at the same time, he does it for his own glory. It was true then, several thousand years ago. It's true today. A few things worth noting from the story that we're going to look at for the next few minutes. First of all is probably the most obvious to you right now. Number one, Yahweh will provide the test. And again, I'm using the word Yahweh in reference to this particular passage, but God will provide the test. The Lord's going to provide the test for us in life. This guy Abraham, fairly wild, woolly, miraculous, eventful life up to this point in Genesis 22. If anything was going to happen that's wild and crazy in the Bible, probably happened with Abraham, at least at some point. He's an interesting cat to read about because the stories cover every emotion and every relational gamut, social gamut that we could encounter in our lives. It probably happened somewhere in Abraham's life, and there are things we can learn from it. But one in particular was the time that God gave him and his wife a son. And that was pretty remarkable because when that happened, Abraham and his wife were north of 100 years of age. And I don't know about you, but anytime anybody I've ever met that's 100 years old that gets pregnant, that impresses me. It's a big deal. Also, I find they're not impressed when that happens. They're actually rather distraught when that happens. But in this case, Abraham and Sarah, they wanted a child, and so God, at 100 years of age, north of 100 years of age, they bless him with this child. And then all of a sudden, and here's where the story comes in, now that miracle has happened. Suddenly, another surprise. Let's take a look at it from Eugene Peterson's rendering of the scripture from something called The Message. This is how it reads. After all of this, God tested Abraham. God said, Abraham. Yes, answered Abraham, I'm listening. God said, take your dear son Isaac, whom you love, go to the land of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I'll point out to you. So Abraham got up early in the morning, saddled the donkey, took two of his young servants, his son Isaac, had split wood for the burnt offering. So just to make sure you didn't miss something in the translation, God asks Abraham to go kill his miracle child. And Abraham has every sound reason to say, I don't think so. We've had a lot of fun up till now, Lord. This has been great, but I'm going to have to bow out. I'm going to go ahead and fold and call. He would have had every reason in the world to do that. Instead, what's so amazing about this story is that Abraham sets out in a general direction of obedience without knowing a lot of details and taking tremendous steps of faith because in his mind, we know from the whole of the story that he is confident that God has a game plan, that this isn't going to turn out badly, but he's going to move in a general direction of obedience anyway. It's an amazing story. Few philosophies I've identified with that have involved what I call unquestionable submission, unquestioned submission in my life. There one time in particular was when I was in the military. And when I was in the military, we weren't at war, so this is nothing at all like what folks have gone through in the last 15, 20 years. We weren't at war when I was in the service, but for me, that first night of basic training was a real life lesson I've never forgotten because I kind of think of it as hell night. That's the night where you fly all night, you're hungry, you're tired, you get thrown into this bay with 50 other confused guys and guys with Smokey Bear hats yelling at you, calling you names and spitting on you and barking orders at you, and they tell you to pick it up, and you pick it up. What'd you pick it up for? Put it down. You put it down. Why'd you put it down? You put it down. And then you walk down this aisle and they yell at you for that, and you do this and they yell at you for that, and they tell you to do this, and when you do it, somebody else yells at you, and you're just frazzled, and you realize in hindsight the reason that's happening is they're initially trying to train you to not question a direct order from authority figure. Doesn't matter what they just said 2 seconds ago. If what they're saying to do right now is what they're saying to do, do it. Don't question it. Now, obviously, you know what happens after you get past this phase of German Shepherd basic commands, and I got pretty good at it. I could heel. I didn't pee on the carpet anymore. I mean, some things really changed for the better when I came home. But when you get past this stage, the drill instructors, of course, then build you back up as a person in the military to make good, sound decisions. But you understand if at the very root of your military experience, if there isn't this ability to take an unquestioned order and just go with it, you wouldn't have a military. Think about a combat maneuver. Okay, guys, we got to take the hill, so let's go. And everybody has an opinion. Question, sir, wouldn't it be better if we went this way? I heard some guys once in Germany went blah, blah, blah. Well, let's have a consensus. What do you guys think? Think the colonel's got this one right? They'd all be dead. They're gone because the military can't advance without that level of unquestioned authority. So we're looking back at Abraham's story, and the question then screams at me, what does unquestioned obedience look like in relationship to God? It doesn't look like basic training. We know that. So what does it look like? And that's where this thing of general direction of obedience comes in. Times in my life, maybe in your life too, a leap of faith is absolutely necessary. You ever been in one of those places before? You've got an opportunity, you believe it's God, but you don't know what's on the other side of it, but you believe it's God. And at the end, the best advice that your friends or people you trust can give you is you're going to have to just there's a risk involved here. You're going to have to take a leap of faith. And it happens in business, it happens in relationships, happens in everything that we do. Because you see, there are times in life where you're not supposed to know the answers in advance. We don't want that. We want all the data. We don't want to risk. But the fact is, we're finite beings. We can't look beyond our experience right now. God sees it all, but we don't. And so it's built into us that we have to, at times, take a step of faith. We have to choose, are we going to obey, and are we going to move forward in this or not? In case, if you haven't noticed also, your faith is much like a muscle in your body. The Bible talks about spiritual things being mirrored or reflected in the physical so that we can understand it. And if you think of faith as a muscle, you can feed your muscle. You can eat all the healthy things that I eat, like cheeseburgers and fries, things that are good for your body. And you eat that, but if you don't exercise the muscle, if you don't stretch it and work it and make it tired so it starts to regenerate cells, you basically will atrophy and die. You need to feed it, but then you need to exercise it. Listen, faith is the same way. You can read the Bible and talk to other followers of Christ and read books and listen to teachings and do things that get you exposed to great training and great information. But if that's all you do, you'll atrophy. At some point, you've got to take that knowledge and you've got to stretch that out and put that faith into motion. And God invites us in our life experience to be in situations where we have to do just that. If nothing else today, when you walk out of here and you face a difficulty in your life, don't think of God as the one that engineered the difficulty. Think of God as the one that wants to meet you in that difficulty to get you strong, to not only get through that difficulty, to be better off for it as you go, and in better shape to deal with the next series of difficulties that come. That's kind of how it works out. So Abraham's rather challenging experience right now with Yahweh Yireh demonstrates that God will from time to time provide the test. And certainly this whole sacrifice your kid thing was a test. But secondly, we find that Yahweh will provide the terms of the test. Here's another area we do not like. Okay, I'm all right with doing it, but I want to set the terms and criteria. And God will have none of that oftentimes. No, I'll go ahead and I'll write up the fine print on the contract. You just kind of keep coming along here. I mentioned a little bit ago that God didn't exactly elaborate on the details with Abraham. Did you pick that up in the passage when we read it? Let me just rehash it for you in case you were sleeping through that one. It happens to me every now and then. Abraham, this is God calling. Take your son, take some firewood, take a big sharp knife to go kill your kid. And I'll let you know when you're in the right place. Okay? Clear enough? Foot. Now off you go. That's pretty much the sum total of what happened in that conversation. Tough assignment. Nonetheless, because Abraham had a pretty good idea who he was dealing with in a God who took good care of him and had followed through and had blessed him, Abraham sought out looking for that specific miracle that was going to happen somewhere in this general direction of obedience. Let me read a little bit more, verses 4 through 6 from Peterson's The Message. It says, Abraham set out for the place God had directed him. And then on the third day, he looked up and he saw the place in the distance. And Abraham told his 2 young servants, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I are going over there to worship, and then we'll come back to you. So Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering, gave it to Isaac his son to carry. He carried the flint and the knife. The 2 of them went off together. Pretty important to notice right away in the text that Abraham says to the servants, the boy and I are going there to worship, and we will be back shortly. He didn't say, the boy and I are going up on the mountainside, I will be back shortly to send you to go clean up a big mess. That's not the deal. And we know from the scholarly approach, the reason Abraham said that is he didn't know how this was all going to play out. He only knew that God was going to do a miracle. He was prepared to sacrifice his son, to take his son's life, only because he believed that God was somehow going to resurrect him or prevent it. But he was ready to go. He had the knife, the wood. He was going to follow through. He knew God well enough to know that this wasn't a wild goose chase. There was a bigger test. Now, by the way, this is another good place to mention, God doesn't do that anymore. So if you ever get, a notion that an in-law of yours has to go, that's not God, okay? That might have just been Thanksgiving that did that, but that's not God. So that's the little asterisk to the show here that, please do not attempt this. This is a closed circuit course. Sometimes The terms for obeying God seem pretty harsh. This is a very, very sharp example when the stakes are so high. But you know what? Our Christian heritage for the last 2,000 years is full of stories of people who have sacrificed everything in order to advance what is right. They've sacrificed everything in order to serve people. They've even laid down their lives, willing to obey Christ for a cause that's bigger than themselves. And so there's nothing new. That's an extreme case with Abraham, but all of us are called to make sacrifices from time to time. Anytime you make a right decision and there's opposition to that right decision, but you pay the price anyway, whether it's relationally or financially or of your time or whatever, there's a sacrifice to be made. So nothing new about that. So in addition to accepting this initial term of God's plan, Abraham hangs in there all the way. He goes way beyond any previous endeavor that God ever called him to. And through confidence in God's master plan of all things, Abraham singles out for sacrifice that which is most precious to him. I don't know how God does it with you, but there are times when if something or someone becomes too precious to me, I almost sense the Lord say, if you're not careful, this or this person will fail you. And if all of your body weight is on this person, this job, this reputation, this possession, this income, if you're not careful and that changes, you will be devastated. You can't put your hope in those things. You've got to put your hope and your worship in Christ and let all of those other things fall into place. And it's not because God's just mad. Well, I want all the attention. You know, at the end of the day, he knows what's best for us. And if that's not in the right place and we get hurt, that's where he gets frustrated. He doesn't want to see us unnecessarily get beaten up if we can avoid that. Okay, again, the servants would have had to have questioned that day what was going on. They started picking up on the fact that he's got the kid, he's got the wood, he's got the sharp knife. We're supposed to stay here. They're going there. Something's going on. But Abraham must have simply somehow replied, God has this covered. He's got this figured out. Now, the original language again, and I've dropped this a few times, it demonstrates that Abraham is basically able to say that Yahweh is able to see the situation. He sees what we're going through now, but he also sees what the turnout is, and I trust God's point of view better than my own. So with that in mind, let me just ask you straight out, what do you need God to provide you with today? You know, I bet if I went through the room and we had a time to just talk privately, there's something that has you fearful, perhaps? Something that has you a little unnerved or concerned about. It could be your health. It could be a relationship. It could be a circumstance outside of your family. It could be your career. It could be just the world we live in right now. There's a lot of anxiety out there. But what would it be that you would need God to reassure you about today? Could it be the hopes for your future or the need of some kind of a miracle? Listen, whatever the case may be, Abraham's example teaches us here in 2013 to believe that God sees and that God is trustworthy with that which is most precious to you. He gets it. He knows. You know, when he looks at us, he just doesn't see a big mob of people like a rock star. Oh, I love you, rock on. No, you know, a rock star doesn't love me. He loves the crowd and the money that the crowd brought, right? When God says, I love you, he's not speaking to the crowd. He's speaking to us as individuals. He knows us intimately and personally. It's a whole different thing. So you can trust that. You can take that one to the bank. Abraham did. And so can you and I. In his experience, in Abraham's walk, Yahweh Yireh provided the test. He provided the terms. Then finally we come to something I want to talk about, which is that Yahweh will provide the triumph. And I hate that word triumph because it's so Bible-y. You know, yea, though, and verily, triumph. Oh, that fit good in that little phrase. But what does it mean today? Well, first of all, terms. And I was using T's, so I was kind of, stranded with a T. But then I looked at triumph, and I realized that's the perfect word because the original Roman word where that came from was a picture of an army that was returning, not just victorious. An army would return after a battle, they'd come home, they'd get celebrated. But a triumph had more to do with what was left of the army coming home. So many of them that left weren't there. People could tell that there was a cost involved. And the soldiers very openly bore their wounds. And they walked back in, if you will, a bloody mess. And it was their triumph because they went through that and came back in and had the battle scars to show it. That constituted a triumph. If there was no blood lost on the battlefield, it wasn't necessarily a triumph in that sense. So, I don't know how they think those things up, but it's an interesting deal because Abraham is doing the unthinkable. He's preparing to sacrifice his son. And in an instant, Abraham's worst moment becomes his most precious. He's willing to do the bloody deed if that's what God wants him to do. He couldn't understand why God would want to do that any more than you and I could understand that, but he was willing to do it because he was trusting God for the end result. And in the moment that he's willing to do that deed, something amazing happens. Abraham's testimony about God being a good God, being a caring God, is now backed up by some behavior. Let's look at the 13th and 14th verse, and we'll sort of glue this all together. They get up there. He's got the knife, got the wood, got the kid. Abraham looks up, and there in the thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns. So he went over, he took the ram, sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day, on that mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. So Abraham finds out, and this is a take-home for us, if God is engineering it, whatever it is, it will work out. And in your life, if God is working on it, whatever it is in good hands with God. You can trust God with it, whatever it is. Last year, I read a book, and when I talked about this here in Billings a couple of months ago, I made a recommendation to people that were listening. I said, you'll want to go out and get this book. And after we talked about it, within a few weeks, several people, over a dozen, came up and said, I went out and bought the book, and I read it, and you're right, it's incredibly inspiring. But I just want to tell you about it. I read a book last year that's one of the best books I've ever read, and it has more to do with my faith experience than it does even the history of the nature of the book. It's called Unbroken by Laura Hildebrand. And it's a bestseller, expected to be released as a movie soon. The story is a dramatic tale of a young man named Louis Zamperini, struggling to survive in unimaginable circumstances during World War II. Let me just give you a snapshot and see if you're ready to go out and buy the book today after lunch. Louis Zamperini, an American athlete, competed in the Berlin Olympics in 1936. He competed in front of Adolf Hitler. Did well. Shortly thereafter, within a couple of years, he served in the Pacific Theater in the Army Air Corps, where Zamperini would endure unimaginable suffering and circumstances during the course of World War II. In one instance, a very key story is he was stranded at sea when the B-24 bomber that he was flying in fell out of the sky, crashed into the ocean, and sunk. And he went into this little two-man life raft at the time with two other guys. One of them eventually died. So he and another guy were in a life raft for 47 days. Let me ask you a question. Clear your mind a little bit. Here comes Rob's ADHD. Squirrel! Here I'm just jumping all over the place. Christmas Day. What were you doing Christmas Day? Think about it for a second. Christmas Day. This last Christmas. What were you doing? Remember what you were doing? Yeah. Remember it? Christmas? Sure. It wasn't that long ago, right? Christmas Day. No, that's not what you were doing. On Christmas Day, you were stranded at sea, and you got into a little two-man life raft. And this afternoon, you're going to get pulled out of that life raft. Christmas was 47 days ago. He was in a two-man raft with no provisions, rainwater. They could catch a fish or a bird or whatever without going crazy. 47 days. And then it got interesting because when they finally hit land and were pulled out of the life raft, they were pulled out by the Japanese army. And he went for the next 3 years in the most unimaginable hell of POW camps than you could possibly imagine. 3 years. In 1942, when they went down, the United States said he was dead, told his family he's dead. They thought he was dead till after the war. In 1945, he came home, back to California. Can you imagine what it was like when he came home? Physically, emotionally emaciated. He was sick. He was wounded. He had fractures that had healed badly from all the beatings and the crash. And so this guy had physical and emotional issues that you can't even imagine. Alcoholism, rage, anger, suicidal tendencies, and hatred. A white-hot hatred for the people that imprisoned him. One guard in particular that just brutalized him beyond imagination. So this was a guy that could have spiraled into oblivion from there. Would you agree? I mean, this is PTSD on an unimaginable scale. But he didn't spiral into oblivion because another most dramatic event happened to Zamperini. Shortly after that, he became a Christ follower by listening to a sermon from Billy Graham. And when he became a Christ follower, his life changed. The anger, the alcoholism, the issues went away. He started getting physically healthy again. He and his wife went out and they started preaching the gospel and accompanying Billy Graham, telling people about the saving grace and love of Jesus. He even traveled back to Japan a couple of times in the early 50s looking for and finding former prisoner of war guards that had brutalized him so he could put their hand on him, look him in the eye, tell him about the love of Jesus, tell him that he forgave him, and hug him and see if there's anything he could do for them. Amazing transformation. Here's the kicker. I haven't told you the best part. The reason I find Louis Zamperini so inspiring personally isn't just because he was a world-class athlete. It's not just because he served his country well during wartime. It wasn't just because he survived being lost at sea for 47 days and lived to tell about it. It's not just because he survived over 3 years of some of the most heinous, sadistic torture and treatment ever suffered by a POW. It's not just because he came back and fought back the demons of rage and war and alcoholism. And it's not even just because he became an influential Christ follower in spite of all that he endured. The reason I'm standing here today talking about Louis Zamperini and why he's so inspiring to me is at 95 years of age, he's still out there alive and kicking. At this very moment, he's in Torrance, California, sitting in church, at his church. He's still telling people about Jesus. 95 years of age after this life, and he's still got a sparkle in his eye. And I think I have problems. I think I have mountains to climb, challenges to overcome. You can probably understand why the book was so significant for me. Listen, we each have challenges and struggles, and they are significant to God. They're significant to us. But you need a perspective right now about a big God that stands behind us personally and takes us by the hand, sometimes by the shoulders, and walks us through these things. I'm ashamed to admit to you that there are times in my life where I actually wonder if God is paying any attention to my struggles. And then I feel like the Lord lovingly taps me and says, Rob, you got a glimpse into Zamperini's life, if for no other reason to understand that I do care about the details, and I'm watching you. And I'm watching after your life, and I'm with you in this. I didn't just single out Louis Zamperini, but he should be an example of how big I can be in those circumstances. Very, very comforting. Kind of puts things in perspective a little bit, doesn't it? Now, here's another verse that hopefully will give you some perspective on top of perspective. Romans 8:28. Seems like such a cliche now, but think about it. And we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. By the way, I just want to remind you that God was working with Zamperini before Zamperini ever knew who God was. So it's not like God was sitting back saying, well, as soon as you cry, uncle, I'll start taking better care of you. He loves us from the moment we're we, you know. He gets us before we ever get ourselves. 2013, we still have a lot of that left in front of us. My greatest source of joy, my greatest sense of contentment, my greatest sense of optimism is not going to come from people in my life. It's not going to come from good things I look forward to or things that I have, because those things can let me down. Those people can fail me, and those things can fail you as well. Instead, I've made a decision, and I want to share that decision with you. My greatest source of joy, contentment, and optimism is going to have to be in my daily decision to roll out of bed and choose to believe and choose to accept the fact that God knows me, that he accepts me, and that he has an important journey for me to finish in this life. Beyond that, I have no details. So let me ask you a question. Can you believe that? No matter what's going on in your life right now, then maybe your faith isn't to the place where you could actually imagine an outcome that'll be good. Maybe you're not there yet. Okay. Can I push you for just a second? Is your faith at least big enough to believe that God is in it with you? Can you at least just take that little step of faith to say, God, I don't know how it's going to work. I've got doubts, but I'm choosing today to believe that you love me enough and you know me intimately, that you're with me in this journey. And Father, if you'll help me to accept that and believe that in my heart, you can build on that. But I'm choosing to believe at least that much, come what may. I want to close by reading a quote for you that was very, very helpful for me. In fact, it's on my office wall in front of my workstation because I have to be reminded of this on a regular basis. Here's a little window into who I am. I'm kind of an insecure sort of person. But this comes from A.W. Tozer. A.W. Tozer was one of the 20th century's greatest theologians. This was not just a weekend Bible study guy. This is a guy that knew ancient languages, all the writings. He knew our Christian doctrine inside and out. He was no spring chicken. This guy knew what he was talking about. So when he wrote something like this, it means something to me. Hope it means something to you. He said, and I'm quoting him here, he said, you know, the goodness of God is that which disposes God to be kind and cordial, benevolent and full of goodwill toward men. He is tender-hearted and he's quick sympathy. And his unfailing attitude toward all mortal beings is open, it's frank, and it's friendly. And by his nature, he's inclined to bestow blessedness. And he takes holy pleasure in the happiness of his people. And then he ends it with these words. He says, the whole outlook of mankind might be changed if we could all believe that we dwell under a friendly sky and that the God of heaven, though exalted in power and majesty, is eager to be friends with us. Can you imagine what the world looks like if people bought into that? Can you imagine what your life could look like in a few months if you really believe that? What my life would look like in a few months if I really chose to believe that and live and function as though that were true. I want to pray for you. And my prayer for you is that if you're walking through the door today and you've got something that's just, it's It's big. I'm going to confirm to you, it probably is. God is never going to say, just stop whining. That's not God. God doesn't do that. He gets it. But he would call us forward to say, can you choose to believe that even though it is in the middle of your life, I'm in the middle of your life too, and I'll overshadow it any day. That's what I want to pray about. Father, our desire is to know you more intimately. We know that we can read all the books in the world and hear all the sermons and talk about you, and we'll learn about you, but God, when it comes to waking up out of bed this morning and having it sitting on our chest, suffocating us with fear or concern, it could be a broken relationship, it could be our kids, it could be a health issue, it could be finances, it could be a career, it could be a habit, it could be a secret. God, it's suffocating. But we choose to believe, if nothing else, that you love us intimately enough and personally enough that you're with us in the middle of it. And I pray that if there's anybody that feels like they're suffocating a little bit from that fear, that they would just bravely believe in their heart, even confess in some meaningful way to you, God, I believe you're with me in the middle of it. I don't understand the details. I don't know how it's going to play out. But I'm choosing to believe you love me enough to stand with me in this, walk me through it, and help me to make hay out of what otherwise would be just a meaningless, miserable, suffering experience. And I just want to ask you folks, with your heads bowed and eyes closed, this is a personal thing for you now. I won't embarrass you. I'm not going to call on you. But I just want to ask you, with heads bowed and eyes closed for privacy, if you're in here today and it is in your face, you're in the middle of it, whatever it is, and you're in a place where you actually would dare to believe that God really does care, that God really is involved in that with you, that he really will walk every step of the way. And if you're willing to admit that to him as maybe a first step of getting your own faith muscles strengthened a little bit, without even looking up, just lift your hand. I just want to pray for you. And your uplifted hand is your way of saying to God, you're literally saying, Lord, my hand represents a gutsy step I'm about to take. I'm about to just step out on faith and say, Lord, I believe you not only know what it is, but you're going to walk with me in this. I'm so desperate right now, God. I have nowhere else to turn. But I'm going to choose to believe today and tomorrow that you're in this. Strengthen my faith. Father, for the hands that are lifted, will you somehow, some way, some amazing way, before the sun goes down tonight in Helena, would you manifest a bit of assurance to the hearts of those with hands lifted today, that they would be assured that you heard them, that you see them, that you know them, that they would be reassured and strengthened in their faith in you. Something meaningful today, whatever that is, that they would be reassured, that they'd know they've latched onto something tangible. And I pray, God, that in their days to come, they would find ways to roll out of bed every day and say, Lord, what do you have in store for me now? Walk with me in this. Don't let me get lost in the torrent. Don't let me lose myself in the torrent. Help me to hang in there, God. Thank you for your faithfulness in our lives. You're good. You're trustworthy. And we ask your grace today in Jesus' name. Amen.
For more information on Narrate Church, visit www.narratechurch.org or download the mobile app, now available for iPhone and Android.